first presentation was about my thoughts and feelings about the randomised controlled trial, and how the trial, in effect, tends to assume that the effects that are seen in the trial, both the specific effects of, say, a remedy or a therapeutic procedure, and the non-specific effects of the context in which a procedure is conducted, that they can be treated as separate entities. And what I was trying to put over in my talk was that actually they're not. They're very much dependent on each other. They are, if you like, complementary in the quantum sense of the word. That you can't have one without the other, and one affects the other. And in fact, I think I showed this at the end of the presentation, there is now some early research that tends to show that randomised controlled trials which concentrate on the consultation tend to lose sight of the therapeutic process, or the therapeutic procedure rather, whereas randomised controlled trials that concentrate on the therapeutic procedure lose sight of the context in which the procedure is operated. So there tends to be a complementarity there, and that complementarity would be possibly very similar to the complementarity in quantum mechanics that Heisenberg pointed out. And that's quite an interesting possibility for how we could begin to view the value of randomised controlled trials in the future. Perhaps we need other ways of testing therapeutic procedures other than a purely scientific fly-on-the-wall approach that the randomised controlled trial tries to achieve. What has been posited is the idea of observational studies, where you're simply, say you've got a new drug or something like that, you release the drug into the population and you see what happens. And that way you could see how effective the drug is, but also you will find out what the possible side effects are. Whereas in a randomised controlled trial, what they're actually looking for is the efficacy of the drug rather than its effectiveness. The efficacy is something which is seen is a, if you like, something which comes out of the particular way that the randomised controlled trial is structured. It doesn't tell you anything about what happens in the long term, about what possible side effects a drug could have, mainly because the trials don't go on for long enough. So its effectiveness is more about what happens in real life. What happens in a randomised controlled trial does not happen in real life, mainly because what happens in real life is that patient and practitioner know what is happening. In a randomised controlled trial, they both know that they don't know what is happening, and that's the problem. So observational studies look at what happens in the long term, instead of trying to get this kind of fly-on-the-wall thing about whether the drug is better than placebo or something like that. I've never come across a placebo that actually doesn't have a direct effect on its own. And anyway, the placebo effect is something which is very much denigrated by scientists, but could possibly be the most powerful therapeutic effect on the planet, and nobody's really studying it properly. The second presentation I gave has more to do with my thoughts about the way that the vitality, if one can call it that, in a human being operates. And for that I've gone back to a very ancient idea called entelechy, which was a concept invented by Aristotle about the way that organisms try to go towards perfection. And this idea was developed during the 16th and 17th century by people like Leibniz into the concept of the vital force. This is the idea that within a living organism there is a vital force that keeps it alive, but it's not, although it's physically embodied, it is not itself observable. And what made me think about this was that there are certain concepts in quantum theory where you can think of certain quantum objects or certain quantum properties being physical but not directly observable. One of the assumptions of materialistic science is that everything that is physical is observable. What quantum theory teaches us is that that is not always the case. And once I saw that and understood that, I thought, well, maybe we could bring the two concepts together and trying to think about the way that the vital force might operate within an organism. And from my studies of complementary and alternative medicine, there seems to be this idea that what the vitality tries to do is, with a disease, is to throw it out to its extremities. And that, to me, reminded me of the way that a spinning top operates. A spinning top, and also things like a gyroscope. So I began to consider the notion that maybe we could think of the gyroscope as a model for the vitality in a human being, and that as when it was healthy, it would be spinning very fast and standing upright and be very difficult to push over. But as it got sick, that would correspond with the flywheel, inverted commas, of this gyroscope beginning to slow down. And when that happens, the gyroscope begins to do something like this. It precesses. Now, that act of precession, I then said, well, maybe this is when it begins to throw out symptoms. So I'm making an equation, if you like, between the throwing out of symptoms and the motion of this gyroscope. And from that, you can start making some interesting predictions about how this vital force is operating and how remedies and therapeutic procedures act upon it. What's been very interesting about this Congress is the way that it's brought together the best of what's happening in what you might call conventional science at the moment in the treatment of geriatric conditions and neurodegenerative diseases. But at the same time, there are also people beginning to play with different ideas about the way that we can treat these conditions. It's the first conference. It would have been nice if some of the people who are involved in more of the very extensive biochemistry came and listened to some of the more, how shall I put it, off the wall or revolutionary ways of looking at things. But it's the first Congress, and the fact that the two were there side by side, I think, is a very, very good thing. And hopefully, in future, they will begin to fructify each other.